Welcome, everyone, to the Evolving Sisters Network podcast. I'm Kenlyn Colleen, and I have an incredible guest today, one who I've really had the privilege of diving deep with as we prepare for a course that she's offering with the Evolving Sisters Network. And this is Quanita Roberson. Welcome, sister.
Thank you. Thank you. How wonderful to be here with you. I'm
It's
just
such a
I'm
privilege.
so excited about this invitation and us being in this conversation today.
It's such a privilege to get to know you and to dive deep with you. We're going to have our conversation today on healing the mother wound.
Mhm.
And I didn't know that you and I, when I met you, were going to dive into this subject matter. It just bubbled up, and it bubbled up in a way that caught my attention
Mhm.
because I realized that I have a lot of, let's say, proficiency with this wound. I have a lot to say about this wound. It's been really my incarnational path. And yet, what I realized is that you hold a perspective that I didn't even see.
Mm.
And that caught my attention. So I want to dive into that. And
Okay.
first, before we do, I want to presence really more about who you are.
Yeah.
I know we met through Claire Dubois and Tree Sisters. She's a
Uh-huh.
raving fan of yours. But
She's
tell us
a
a little
close
bit.
friend too. I love her.
She's amazing. So tell us a little bit about the context in which you work and live in your magic
Yeah.
world.
Yeah, so I live in Cincinnati, Ohio, and have been working in coaching and facilitation or hosting groups and running retreats for over the past 20 years. And I often will say that I'm the promise of forgiveness and reconciliation in the world. And so my work centers around that, whether it's working on one-to-one reconciling and coaching, reconciling the inner parts of ourselves, or whether it's working in organizations and helping people to go it better together and reconciling some of the conflict that happens in communities where we're trying to journey together when we have the differences that we have to tend to, or whether it's the global work, whether it's looking at how do we change the face of what leadership is in our world or what we consider leadership, and inviting in more wise leadership and not just leadership. I always say leadership just means that people are following you. It says nothing about where you're taking them. And so, looking at how do we create more wise, soulful leadership in the world. And all of those pieces are pieces around forgiveness and reconciliation.
Mm.
So I think that it just shows up in lots of different ways, including in the books that I've written or helped support. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of a book, let's just present your book right now. So in case people want to order that, what is the name
Yeah.
of your book around these 40-day rituals?
So I have a book called The Inner Ground Railroad, a 40-day journey to remembering soul and spirit. And it's designed to heal the ancestor legacy of slavery for first all Americans, but I always say bondage is bondage. So it doesn't matter whether you're American or not, whether you're, a person of color or not, or whether you're a man or a woman, that the journey itself is about finding our own freedom. I often will say to people, I don't want you to be my ally. I want you to save your own damn self. so that book is part of that journey. I think another book that I have that feeds into the work that we're going to be doing in this workshop is Soul Growing 2. And it's wisdom for 13-year-old girls from women around the world. And I've asked women that I know, and I think this one has women from 14 different countries, to complete the sentence, I wish somebody would have told me blank when I was 13.
Mm.
And it's wisdom for 13-year-old girls, but I also think it's wisdom for the 13-year-old girls that are inside of each of us that still wants to be healed, that still wants to be reconciled.
Ah, that is so beautiful. And I'll put the links inside
Yeah.
of the show notes for everyone. So I think, as people might already guess, like, you can talk about anything, and I could listen to you for hours about anything. So, and maybe we will do that. Like, maybe you could be a regular guest. I think your perspective is is so needed. And the fact that you talk about reconciliation and forgiveness, it's just a salve for what the world needs right now. And so let's turn our topic today to the mother, our mothers.
Yes.
Do you want to share a little bit about your story of your own mother and mothering as a way of getting into this topic?
Sure. So my own mother, my parents were 15 going on 16 when I was born. And my mother was one of 9 in her family, the daughter of a pastor of a holiness church when she got pregnant with me. And one of the things I love that she wrote about and that I actually put in my book, it was she talked about her dad picking her up from my dad's house and not knowing in the car whether or not he knew that she was pregnant. She suspected her sister knew. And so she didn't know if her sister had told her parents already or not. And that when they arrived home and she walked in the back door of what the house is and then into the dining room, the whole family was sitting at the dining room table. And she said it was the first time that she realized that it wasn't a personal issue, it was a communal one, it was a family one. And so I write about how my life has been steeped in community from even before I was born. And so to me, that's some of my relationship to, this work and holding, because I came home from the hospital to my grandmother's home. Another piece of that I would say is that my mother, I'm an incest survivor. My mother was with my stepfather even when she died in 2010, I think is when she died. And I was her only child. And so the wound that she and I had and me, her living with my perpetrator still till then. And I went to court and pressed charges against my stepfather when I was 15. And I stood on one part of the courtroom when he was being sentenced, and he and my mother stood on the other side. And he was sentenced something like 90 days to be served on weekends. And so he could go to work during the week. And I lived in the house until my 18th birthday with him. And so this piece around forgiveness for him, for my mother, for what does that look like? What does the journey look like for me? I would say there was something in me that knew, number one, that I had to go to court because I needed to know that I would stand up for myself if no one else did. And then number two was that I stayed in relationship with my mother. I was her only child. And learning what boundaries I needed to put in place to be in relationship with her. I am glad to say that when she died, there wasn't anything left unsaid between us, and so I feel like even in that place that there was a healing that happened. And then my own mothering, me mothering my children. I'm the mother of a 22, he'll be 22 next month or November, 22-year-old son and a 19-year-old daughter, multiracial beings. And one of the things I think in this reconciliation around race that I speak about in the book is I ask myself the question, who am I called to be to hold all of who they are? These sons and daughters of the American Revolution and descendants of slaves. And so the book for me, in some ways, is me doing my own journey and learning what does that require of me.
Wow. I mean, I bet those listening, I have this experience of just huge destiny. Did you ever feel that way growing up, that you had just a huge calling, a destiny with all of these factors woven through your tapestry?
I think that looking back, I can see that, but you can't know your life always looking forward. You can only make sense of it looking back. And there were times that I just knew like there was things that I could not do. The other thing that I would say that that was a huge influence in my life is I went to a performing arts school here in Cincinnati that was created because there was a lawsuit that charged that the school district was racially segregated. And what they found is that the school was unintentionally segregated because the neighborhoods were so segregated. And so to avoid mandatory busing, they created these magnet schools, one being the School for Creative and Performing Arts, that was required under court mandate for all the years I was there to have everything in the school be racially balanced 49-49. So we would always have two casts for every performance. You would always know they were gonna cast a white Daddy Warbucks and a black Daddy Warbucks, or a white Annie and black Annie. They mixed the cast and then they alternated performances. But to grow up in an environment where every year the principal would give what we call the race speech. If you're a white student in school, you don't have a friend of color, something's wrong. If you're a black student in school, you don't have a white friend, something's wrong. And so being raised in that, and in a family, a black and white family, my stepfather was white, being raised in this integrated family. I think one of the ways that I hold this work is I don't hold either side as victim, which allows me to hold it in a cleaner way than I think lots of people are able to.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of your superpowers. Let's go back to your mother, and because I'm just struck by how did you get to be such a badass is really the conversation in my head. Like, how did you at 15 years old have the fortitude and the strength to seek a restraining order? Like, who are your mentors? Who made it okay for you to do that?
Yeah, first I would have to say the School for Creative and Performing Arts. One of the things about that school is they just thought we could do anything, so we did. And there's a way in which, I'm still in contact with some of the teachers there even today. There's a way in which they believed in us that made me even think that I could do that. When it went through and was reported to the police by my therapist, and the police called me in, and then I went to go meet a prosecuting attorney. He left it up to me. He says, we don't have a case without you. And so it's up to you whether you want to pursue this or not. And so I remember I took the whole summer to decide. And what I decided was that piece that I talked about I needed to know that I would stand up for myself, even if no one else would. And I knew that for me, it wasn't, a friend asked me once, well, did you know how brave that was? And I said, it wasn't bravery for me. It was really a question on whether I was going to stay alive or not. And I knew there was something in me that knew then that if I didn't do it, I was going to die. Whether it was fast or slow, it didn't matter. And so I had to show up for me. And matter of fact, I went to the grand jury, and straight from there, I went back to school that day. So like the school was my place, as it was for lots of us.
And that's really what we're talking about as we weave in the contents of what you're going to be offering through the Evolving Sisters Network in the form of a Many Mothers course.
Yes.
We're really weaving in the conversation of the community. And that goes back to why I was so blown away talking to you, not just because you can talk about everything and have a story and make it relatable, and your stand for forgiveness and reconciliation. Those are all there. There's just this piece as well that I found, and maybe it is because I'm a white woman in a patriarchal culture that never really got the concept of community. I mean, that's kind of new to me, honestly, in a visceral sense.
Yeah.
Tell me how that sense developed in you. Was it the school, or was it there prior to the school, or was it in your DNA?
Yeah, I think it was like I spoke to even before I was born, my mother, that whole piece of meeting at the dining room table, right? So that's in, and I often speak about it when I'm hosting circle conversations. And I speak about how my connection to circle, which to me is community, started not only, in my home, in my grandparents' home, but also when I was in preschool and in my Montessori education class, where we would sit in a circle. And when it was your birthday, they put the candle in the center and you walked around your many times around the sun, right? And there's a way of circle and community that's leaned in there. And then my grandfather's church, who I grew up in, who the pastors would surround you and circle and pray on you and lay their hands on you in that way, or even later as I grew and went to, like I said, performing arts. There was ways in which being in community there, I was in the music theater program. And so we spent lots of time backstage with each other. and lots of times in class with each other. And so you had to learn how to get along with people. You had to learn when someone said, leave me alone, to leave them alone, like, because you're with people so often. There was one guy, I remember our 10th grade year, we had 9 classes during the day, and there was an early bird class. So he and I were in like 8 of our 9 classes together that year. And so learning how do you get along with somebody when you're with them that much, including music theater, which also meant after school, if we had performances, we averaged probably about 2 performances a week. And so we were together a lot. And so there's a sense in Montessori, what Montessori is rooted in community and tradition and stuff that we had built into the school there helped. And then I'll say afterwards, I worked for an organization called Public Allies. And Public Allies is a partial AmeriCorps funded program, which has young people placed in nonprofit organizations for a 10-month apprenticeship. And then they would come to us on Fridays, and we'd have team building exercises, and we'd also have a community project that they worked on. And I was program manager for one of the teams, as well as director of recruitment there. So learning how to foster that, not only with the allies, but also with the partner organizations and the communities that we worked in. And one more I'll say is that, and then later in working for Public Allies, actually, we were struggling as a staff and with our ED at that point. And we went to national, and actually as a staff, we said, okay, so either she goes or all of us are going. And national said, no, that's not how this is going down. They said, if we can't do our own healing work in nonprofit organizations, what chance do we have? And they sent in a shaman to work with us as a staff for a week. And so she had us lean in and for a week and talk about what was blocking us from showing up for each other. We did fire ritual with each other. And, that was another like just big, huge teaching. And this person became one of my mentors and teachers as well.
Oh, I love that. Oh my goodness. So whoever's listening to this in the corporate world or nonprofit world, that it's okay to interrupt it with some woo-woo stuff.
Yes, yes. And not only okay, but because so often we don't know how to do it, right?
Yeah.
We don't know how to do it in the ways that we've been relating to each other. So we have to be open to trying something different, because it's only by trying something different that you're going to get something new.
So where was it in your journey? I mean, there's so much to unpack here, but I'm going to ask, where was it in your journey where you discovered that you too were a healer and a shaman? How did that evolve?
Yeah. I think, frankly, I ran away from it for a long time because I did not want to be that. I think that, and I don't know what I thought that was, but I knew as teachers started showing up for me and challenging me to step into more, I kind of wanted to a little bit and not. And I think part of it is because there is a responsibility with it that I was aware of that I really didn't want. And I also think there's a way in which people need me to be something or someone that I didn't know how to hold either. And lots of it is the mothering with people who show up in the work. It's, we've had these experiences with our own mothers where we haven't had necessarily healthy holding in that way to help grow us up. And so, I had to learn first how to be in it and not be of it, how to let spirit really flow through me and me be clear that it wasn't me, that there is a part in a role that I play, and it's co-creation with spirit. But so often it's just about me showing up and getting out of the way.
Yeah. Isn't that the truth? It's so much easier.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how does your roots, I mean, because one of your teachers is from Burkina Faso and you credit her in your book. How impactful was it to find mentors and teachers that were from Africa?
Yeah. Yeah. So Sabongfu Somé, her work, she just, it's her work and Melodoma Somé's work from Burkina Faso in West Africa. that has been so powerful in my life. And I think more so for me, it was Sambungfu, because she really speaks about the women's wisdom from Africa.
Mm.
And there's a way in which that wisdom, being a woman, an Afro-descendant woman, there's a way in where some of that medicine I had forgotten. And it's a calling back home that I feel, in a place where, I've not always felt home in the United States. It's not has always felt that way for me. And so feeling that, which was so resonant in my family too. One of the things that she said that I think impacts this particular work for me is she speaks about how when she was growing up, all the women in the village took care of all the kids. And so she was about 7 years old before she realized that she was actually birthed from one woman. She said it was actually quite confusing. and I've often, talked about, and I figured out, like, I was probably about 30 years old before I realized that I was birthed by many mothers.
Mm.
And so learning, like, what does that mean? Like, what pieces of each of their legacy lives in me? And that mother-daughter walk is not always an easy one. And so who of those mothers and those relationships transitioned in a graceful way? And what ones were more of a struggle? And what role was I in that? And so really learning those different pieces about what each of those women had to gift me with that my mother didn't, especially being a mother at 15. There were things and ways in which we just grew up together because she didn't know. She was 15.
Yeah. How did that revelation and that holding of a new context, how did that actually heal you with your own mother, or was it instrumental in the healing of your own mother?
Well, I think by the time I really got that, my mother had already transitioned off this earth plane.
Mm.
But one of the pieces that helped is Jojo Pa Maria, who's one of my mentor teachers, elders, everything, I'll say, sometimes sister, friend, all the stuff. She was stayed in my mother-in-law's home for a while after my mother-in-law died as we were getting the house ready to sell. And so she was around to work with me in a real one-to-one way and deep diving into my own healing, which at that point, my mother was still alive. And one of the biggest gifts I say that I got from Jojo Pa was that she mothered me. So that gave me space not to expect that in that way from my mother, that I could heal that piece between us, that I could learn how to love my mother in a way and not expect her to be something that she wasn't.
That right there, how, like, that seed of extending that level of grace to your mother, who there's such a cloud of expectations that she shows up for you. After all,
Mhm.
you are her daughter. I mean, that right there that's mind blowing to me. It took me so long to get to that place. I guess I just want to unpack that a little more for those people that I'm thinking are going to be hearing this and feeling it as, like, I'm here, and then that is like a leap over here. What is the winding pathway
Yeah.
to get there?
Well, I think one of the things is it's a very Eurocentric way of seeing mother,
Mm.
that our mother is supposed to be everything to us. It's the homesteader. It's the, like, going out. It's not an African centric way of seeing mother. And so even the fact of being there is some of the effects of the colonization, right? And so part of it is that, one of the things Jojo Pa said to me once about my parents, she says, sometimes your parents' only job, and so I'll say it here about our mothers, sometimes our mother's only job is to bring us to this earth plane. Sometimes they have nothing else for us. And that's enough. And we just live in the culture that we're expecting everything from one person that they can't give you. I tell my children all the time, look for your community mamas and papas, because they have stuff for you that I can't give to you,
Mm.
that I'm not supposed to give to you. That's not my job.
Mm.
The other thing that I think that realization that helps is we often will get so upset with our parents, our mothers, because We know some things and they don't, and they just can't get it. They just don't get it or understand. And so we think something's wrong instead of really getting that that's evolution. That for evolution to work, we're supposed to grow past our parents and our children are supposed to grow past us. It doesn't mean that something's wrong.
Yeah.
You know, and we can honor who they are and the leg that they've done of the journey, and that the foundation that they've placed, so we can go to that next layer.
Mm. Yeah, and they're right there. I can feel already the oozing in of the reconciliation and the
Yeah.
healing in the perspective that you hold. I want to unpack a little bit about the African roots and the Eurocentric way of projecting onto mother. I mean, that
Mhm.
feels like this is where I get into the patriarchy and the vestiges of the patriarchy on the feminine, and how the feminine has
Yeah.
like been pressured and also maligned, excluded, suppressed, repressed, all the things and so we talked about this in
Mhm.
preparing for your course, that and this is really what I felt when I realized that the way that you would do this course would be different than the way I would do this course, because I'm inside of that matrix. And while you live here and your father is white,
Mhm.
there's a foot for you outside this matrix.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what I loved about how there's almost like you're offering us, hey, everybody over here, there's something else for
Yeah.
you. Come back, come home. You want to
Yeah.
speak to that?
Well, and I'll say, first of all, my stepfather's white. My birth father is African American and has
Ah,
always
okay.
still been
Thanks.
in my life, you know. So just that piece. I think that the there's a woman, her name is Ria Fierro, who wrote a book called The Seeds of White Supremacy.
Mm,
And one of the things that she speaks about is that as white people, that you're born as tools of the patriarchy, that you're born into that, you know, and what it is for me, and all of us live in that water, right? And so I always speak to that we're all swimming in the water of what's right, real, and true as white and male. And then what we do is we use that as a yardstick to measure everything.
mm,
And so what's healed and what's not, all those, right? What's successful and what's not, what's privileged and what's not. But I often say that's not my yardstick. It's not privileged to be disconnected from your heart, you know, if that's where we're at, right? But one of the things that Rita says in her work, which I think is so powerful, is she says that, you know, because white people are born as tools of the patriarchy, the threat is always, if you don't stay in line, you'll be kicked out of the family, then you can't survive.
yeah.
And I think about, like, even my mother-in-law, who was so afraid that her parents would disinherit her when I was dating her son, who is white, that she moved. She moved out of where she lived on their property in Kentucky to Cincinnati, Ohio, right? So that her parents wouldn't see me coming and going and wouldn't disinherit her. And so Rita talks about how most women of color, even if it's a hot damn mess in the relationship with their parents, they usually know that their parents still love them.
Mm,
Now, of course, to both sides, there's exceptions to every rule, you know, and that this is patterns that we see coming out time and time again. And so this piece about, can you really show up and be yourself? You know, one of the things in my family is it didn't matter whether my family really understood me or agreed with me. You know, there was always a place there for me,
mm,
for good or for bad, you
mm,
know, and lots of communities of color, not only the race piece that plays in, but also the class piece. And so if someone in the family is, has did something wrong or whatever we consider wrong in the family and would normally get kicked out. In poor families and communities of color, often you can't kick them out. They really have no place to go.
mm.
And so you have to learn how to live with them. you know? And so there's that difference that I think shows up.
Yeah, that's really powerful because I think as especially white women in this culture don't really get the air we're breathing, or I don't get the water that I'm swimming in. I don't see the matrix until someone like you starts to pull it apart. And then I discover, holy shit, uh, that not feeling loved is a part of my story.
Yeah.
And even earlier in the year, I wrote about to my list how I discovered last year that I was in my mom's will, but like not as an equal to my sister,
Mm-hmm.
and just perfunctory. And that like cut me deep. And the good news is that I kind of got to do what you got to do, is stand up for myself. And I got to share from a vulnerable place, but also an empowered place with my mother, how that occurred to me. And I'm in the will. And
Yeah.
I realized like my mom is not wealthy and it's not about money. It was like I got to claim that I belong and that I am your daughter. And that just like, like my codes inside me like shifted. And the
Yeah.
way that I am in the world and in building the Evolving Sisters Network and all that it takes to really show up and not doubt myself and not cut myself off at the knees and not self-sabotage were part of that matrix. And I didn't even see it.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things too that I'll add on to this, because I heard John Powell talk about this once from the Center of Belonging. He spoke to, in his family, like for his parents, every one of the kids felt like they were the favorite. And there's a way in which we have that with my grandparents. Like all the grandchildren, and there were over 24 of us, would always said that we were the favorite. And there's a way in which community allows for that, because there is the one-on-one connection. I would stand here and tell you I was my grandfather's favorite, right? Like, I even have his Bible. I have like all those kinds of things, but it's like that what community allows for us is that it's the intimacy that can show up then with each person.
Mm.
It's not, you're not just a face in the crowd, you matter,
Mm.
I remember the peach sweater my grandmother bought me when we were out shopping together and said, "Oh, don't tell anybody else," right? Those kinds of
Yeah.
moments.
I mean, what I hear too is just this acceptance
Yeah.
that you have 24 grandchildren and they all feel like they're the favorite. For me, feels like they all felt accepted.
Yes.
They
Yes.
all felt loved. And
Yes.
in my family, we knew who the most favorite one was, and we'd all go, "Yep, you were. I wasn't. You were." And we all have this wounding about how I wasn't.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's
And
what we're here to
yeah.
heal.
Yes. And I think that, but that's the communal piece from Africa
Mm-hmm.
that we are not so far away from. My grandfather,
Mm-hmm.
his grandmother was born a slave.
Mm-hmm.
And his mother died in childbirth with one of his brothers. And so he was raised by his grandmother. So if you think about me coming home into my grandparents' home, it's 2 steps away from my great grandmother or my great great grandmother who was born a slave. Yeah.
So let's kind of, we'll kind of wrap it up a little bit
Yeah.
here. Tell us about what you want to do inside of this course. It's called Many Mothers. And
Yes.
I just love the context that you're holding all of this and inviting all of this. Like, is this course only for white women? Is it only for women who understand the patriarchy? Like, tell me who can come and what we're going to do inside of this course.
I think as women, we all have mothers, and there's a mother story. Even if your mother was absent, that's a story in of itself,
Mm.
and it doesn't, for me, have to be about just women who feel like they've been wounded by their mother either.
Mhm.
It's not just the mother wound, it's our mother's stories. And there's always healing that can happen. Healing happens in deeper and deeper layers. And so it's, first of all, looking at what is our mother's story. What is the story that I've carried around me being mothered in the world?
Mm,
And how have those stories maybe blocked me from seeing other places that I either was mothered or mothering was available to me? Because I think that the universe is exact and it sends us exactly what we need for who we're supposed to be on this earth plane, even when we can't see it.
mm,
And so then it's like, where are the places that maybe it was present, but I didn't see it? What was my story around being mothered? What is my story around mothering? And how has that developed from that story? Who in the community mothered me in ways that I hadn't considered? One of the things I became really aware of at one point is I was looking at mothering and looking and wanting from my mother. So I didn't even notice that this mothering over here was happening, And then how does knowing that and seeing those things reshape and reform the story that I hold about my mothering? Yeah.
I'm so excited for this. And just the context, the holding, the love that you bring, the frequency of forgiveness and reconciliation, the like we talk about it as a constellation of these stars and the map that you're going to support people in creating to see the picture from a new way.
Yeah.
And then I feel like there's really this implicit invitation. I felt it when I was speaking with you, and I feel it now, of this invitation to like, come home, come
Yeah.
home. You're
Yeah.
welcome. And
Yes.
it's not just your family, my family, whatever, they're going to do what they do, but it's
Yes.
welcome to the family, the
Yes.
family of our origin, the family of where we came from, the family of humanity.
Mhm.
How would that change things if we understood that?
Well, and the role that we play in shifting the mother story,
Mm,
not just
mm,
for ourselves, but for our lineage, for our mothers and for our children and our grandchildren, because we aren't in isolation. One of the reasons that this work is hard is because when I shift, something in my ancestors shift, something in my children shift.
mm.
We don't just stand alone.
Yeah, and that helps us really understand healing as a multi-dimensional phenomenon that's outside of time and space.
Yes.
And that gives us back our sovereignty as spirit beings in a body.
Yes.
And yet we got to do the work. We
Yes.
got to peel the layers. Yeah, you and I
Definitely.
were talking about that because there's there is work here, but
Mhm.
and what I will say about working with you in just the ways that we have woven this thread is that your storytelling and the way you hold it makes it fun. I mean,
Yeah.
is there something for you in that, like that theater
Yeah.
background, that this gets to
Well,
be fun too?
well, I always say I look for work that's deep, fun, and easy.
Mm,
That it should have deep heart and meaning. It should be fun. I should enjoy what I'm doing and who I'm doing it with. Not that
mm,
it's not hard work.
mm,
And there should be an ease or a flow, which tells me it's an alignment.
mm,
And so I look for those three things. And if one of those things are off, I'm clear it's not for me.
mm. Beautiful.
Yeah.
All right, sisters, you heard it. This is Quanita Roberson. I'm so honored to have this course really be the launch of the Evolving Sisters
Mhm.
Network and my vision of having wise women, grassroots women in our community give their gifts and their medicine for the healing and empowerment and the leadership of each and every one of us.
Yeah.
Thank you, Quanita, for being
Thank you very
here.
much. Yes. Thanks for the invitation. I'm
Yeah.
excited to be a part of this.